Welcome to another episode of the 6Ps podcast. We're continuing our look at Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard, and today's episode is going to focus on film techniques. So, film techniques are also known as cinematic devices or directorial decisions. There are many ways to describe them, but these form the backbone of film construction, which is how the film is made rather than simply what the film is about. And film techniques are essential in film analysis, especially with essay topics which begin with phrasing like, how does Wilder? And we have seen one of these topics in 2023 and another one in 2024. Now, this video is not an exhaustive list of film techniques and analysis. It's merely a snapshot. I've tried to use different examples from different scenes, but there are so many aspects of this film that you could take and analyze. And this, as I said, is just a bit of a snapshot. When you're using your film techniques in your essays, it's really important to provide context to the scene and to try and include a quotation, or if not more than one quotation. Be explicit in using meta language to showcase your understanding. And that's really important, particularly on the rubric for the SAC. Now, always explain why it is used as well, because every choice, every scene, and every shot, and every word even said by the actors has a purpose. And we've got some sentence starters there that might be really useful for you to use when it comes to initially employing film techniques in your analysis, and we'll touch on this a little bit later on. So let's begin our deep dive with mise-en-scène, which is shot composition. How everything is arranged, pretty much what you can see in the frame, including what's in the background and what's in the foreground. And we've got two examples here. The first one is when Joe is filmed from underneath. He's floating in the pool. In fact, I believe this was actually taken or done via mirrors. Now his eyes are open and we can see that pretty clearly. And the press or the photographers are taking photos of him in the background and the cameras are flashing. So Wilder portrays Joe's floating body and his open eyes by using an underwater shot to humanize him. In stark contrast, the photographers in the background appear detached and clinical as their cameras flash, reducing his body to a mere spectacle, symbolizing Hollywood's obsession with celebrity and scandal. The second frame there that you can see, the thing I just wanted to point out to you there is the frames or the photo frames of Norma Desmond that surround Joe. Here we can see he's definitely trapped in her world. I think we will actually look at that shot a little bit later on as well. But pretty much whatever you see on the screen, we just refer to as mise-en-scène. Everyone knows what a close-up is. It's a shot which tightly frames a character's face, or even it can also actually be an object as well. Norma is consistently shot with close-ups to show her exaggerated reactions, which I guess mimic her acting style in the silent era films. In fact, she even says at the end of the film, "Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up." Wilder's concluding close-up captures Norma's final descent into madness. Her eyes widen with a disturbing blend of ecstasy and detachment, fully immersing herself in the fantasy that she's returning to stardom. The camera mirrors her desire to be seen and adored, yet it also isolates her too, showing the audience just how far removed from reality she really has become. Wilder uses the close-up ironically. A shot once used to glorify stars now exposes the tragic cost of fame and obsession. And in fact, we see a close-up of one of her previous films as well. But I think close-ups are pretty straightforward and really good to use, again, when you're talking about facial expressions or reactions or even particular things the director wants to focus on, like we can see in the first one there, that first shot up the top of that cigarette holder, which Norma Desmond has in her hand. Long shots. I guess, unlike a close-up, long shot provides us with a little bit more context into where the character is. It's a shot which presents a character or characters' full bodies and their surrounding environment as well. In this example, well, we've got two examples here. The first one is our initial introduction to Norma, not Norm, to the film when she's standing behind the bamboo blind with her sunglasses on from a distance. And the second one is just now Joe and Norma dancing on New Year's Eve. It's actually from a bit of a high angle as well. You could probably call it a high angled long shot of them dancing on New Year's Eve to heighten their isolation. And also, I guess, intensify Norma's desperation for companionship. And it also reinforces her delusions, this grand New Year's Eve party with the tiled floors and the musicians playing in the background, and it's just her and Joe. The top frame I really like, particularly I guess the sunglasses that she's wearing, the fact that she can't see clearly, and then again we can't see her clearly because of the bamboo blinds. Again, this idea about reality and even delusion there you could talk about as well. I mentioned high camera angles before. High camera angles is obviously when the camera looks down on the subject from above. So it's filmed from up on high. So if you're not too sure about high camera angles and low camera angles, just think, where is the camera located? Okay, high camera angles up high, we're looking down on the characters. And this scene here we've got is Norma when she offers Joe the writing job while standing at the top of the stairs. Now, by showing a high camera angle from Norma's view, it showcases her superiority over Joe's powerlessness and his vulnerability as well. And I guess to an extent, it also reflects Hollywood's hierarchy at the time, where actors and actresses were celebrated and acknowledged far more than writers were. But anytime we see a high camera angle, it's meant to showcase the power and balance, and words like vulnerability and powerlessness work really, really well. Obviously, this idea as well about the hierarchy in Hollywood, this is something that Wilder condemns. There's a few quotes later on throughout the film. But again, when we're talking about film techniques, we're also thinking about what messages the director is sending. So this is a great example of where we can say, right, a high camera angle shows Hollywood's hierarchy, and this is something that Wilder condemns. The opposite of a high camera angle is a low camera angle, which is positioned below the subject's eye level, looking up at them. We've got Joe looking up at Sheldrake when pitching his ideas, and Norma while watching her film and critiquing Hollywood. The first one's, I guess, it's an over the shoulder shot as well, you could say. The explanation. So Wilder implements low camera angle shots initially to portray Norma Desmond's dominance over Joe, enhancing her sense of power and the oppressive atmosphere of her world. And just that tip underneath there, which is really, really important, is try to couple camera angles with other techniques like mise-en-scène, like lighting or the shot. And that's probably something for you to note as well, that these film techniques don't operate in isolation. They all work together. So it's not just a matter of plucking out a film technique here or there. Consider how they work together and the messages that they're trying to send. All right, non-diegetic sound. This is pretty much sound that doesn't originate from the world of the film, so pretty much the characters cannot hear it. This includes background music, sound effects, and even narration, which we have quite prominently in this film. The example I want to use is Waxman's score or soundtrack, which comes up throughout this film. And the explanation here we have is Waxman's sweeping orchestral music amplifies the drama of Norma's delusion and creates a contrast between her internal fantasy and the external reality, which at the end of the film is her arrest for murder, which is when the score really heightens and intensifies. The music mimics the over-the-top scores of silent cinema, mirroring Norma's perception of herself as a still relevant star. And obviously silent films, they didn't have people talking, but they still did have things like music, so it's something to take note of there as well. Remember, again, film techniques don't work in isolation, so couple the soundtrack and narrative voice with other features to elevate your analysis. And we might talk about narrative voice a little bit later on as well. And we like our opposites. So the opposite of non-diegetic sound is diegetic sound. And this is obviously sound within the film that the characters can hear. And it's used to really immerse the viewer in the world of the film. The examples I have, the first one I like is the organ music. The organ sort of plays by itself. The wind sort of sweeps through it. Again, it's that ominous, foreboding tone, that film noir element of the film. I also like the hum of the projector and the silence of the footage that contrasts with Norma's excitement when she's watching one of her past films. And here we can see the director uses the diegetic sound to immerse the audience in Norma's world and to emphasize how she's trapped in the loop of nostalgia. The use of real film. Reels also critiques how Hollywood commodifies and discards its stars, and the scene also underscores her obsession with the past and highlights how she's cut off from the present world. Let's talk about lighting. There's so many different types of lighting. Some you can talk about are natural lighting, dim lighting, backlighting. These are all used to create atmosphere in a film. And I like to use this idea about, oh, it's a bit shady. If there's, lots of shadows, then it means that, the character or the atmosphere is a little bit shady. A good example here, we're just going to springboard off the previous scene, is when the projection backlights Norma's face during her monologue. Now, because they are playing Norma's old movie, there was no other light in the room except the projector. The light from the projector shone on Norma's face, and Norma slowly turned her head to face the light. The light, as this time, behaved like a spotlight, reflecting Norma's obsession with becoming a superstar. And just a tip down the bottom as well, avoid the word dark lighting. It doesn't really make much sense, so instead I always say go with dim lighting. It works a lot better. Something that makes this film unique is the cameos. We have real people playing themselves in this film. Some examples we have here are Hedda Hopper up the top. We've got Buster Keaton. We also have Anna Nilsson. They're both the Waxworks, the previous actors from the silent era that have been forgotten, and CC DeMille, the most prominent one, because he's very prevalent in the Paramount Studios scene. Wilder employs Hollywood icons playing themselves to blur the lines between reality and fiction. And by creating a more believable atmosphere, Wilder is able to be more biting, more scathing with his critique of the industry. Now that's quite a broad analysis there. What I would be doing is I'd really be honing in on specific cameos and sort of how they, or what messages that Wilder is sending through them. So for example, Hedda Hopper, she's a gossip columnist, and here she's on the phone. The police can't actually use the phone, but because she's on the phone, she's more important. And I guess that sort of shows it in Hollywood that the scandal, the story is more important than the investigation or justice. And you've got Buster Keaton there as well. He was a huge star in the silent era, but all he has is one line in this film. It's just the word pass, which I'm sure you could analyze that idea as well, sort of passing from one era to the other, or sort of fading away or passing away. He's been forgotten about, he's been discarded like so many of the silent era stars, and that would be quite confronting for some audience members as well. And obviously having CC DeMille play himself, he's a director in Hollywood. He's super famous, again, adds to that realism of how Hollywood treats its stars. And a lot of his commentary around that is really important, and that would definitely be some quotations that I'd be memorizing as well. Things about, a dozen press agents, what they could do, the 30 million fans who all discarded her. There's so much around what CC DeMille says, and definitely a scene I would consider analysing in more detail. Along with cameos, you could probably suggest that the Gloria Swanson and Eric von Stroheim, they both play characters similar to their own stories. These huge stars in the silent era who are now relegated to sort of bit parts. So, or who've sort of been forgotten about, I guess, in the case of Gloria Swanson. So you definitely can touch on that if you want to, but I think the cameos, these three characters, are very much worth analysing in your essays if the topic suits. Again, something that I guess is unique to this particular film is the voiceover, the narrative voice. This is just the off-screen commentary by character reflecting on events. In this case, we've got Joe narrating the story of his death from the outset of the film, where he says, "Poor dope, he always wanted a pool, but the price turned up a little high." Here, the director establishes some dramatic irony and detachment, positioning the audience as critical observers of Hollywood's illusions and ideas of success, particularly in that particular quotation before. Note the dual meaning of the pool. It's a symbol of wealth and success, but it's also the place where Joe dies. And for Joe, was it all worth it? Well, the non-linear or circular structure of the film helps answer that exact question. It is a voiceover though that's sort of, it's posthumous, so it's after he dies. So the story is told in hindsight. That's probably something that's important to note as well. Not necessarily a film technique, but definitely a textual feature we see a bit in some of the texts we've studied is intertextuality, that sort of references to other texts. And these sort of add a sense of realism to the film, especially the many nods to Hollywood and some of the films. So we've got a couple of novels. We've got Great Expectations. In fact, I think The Mansion is referenced to be a little bit like Miss Havisham's Mansion in Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. There's also a connection there between Miss Havisham and Norma, and what happens to Joe and Pip in the text. You can sort of relate Pip and Joe together. Three Young Lions, again. That's a book that Joe is reading, and that links to, I guess, the predicament he finds himself in. We've got Gone with the Wind, which is a very famous film that won a lot of Oscars. It was highly acclaimed, but that Sheldrake passed on because he didn't think that people wanted to watch a Civil War film. Again, touches on this idea about originality in Hollywood, or the lack thereof, particularly executives. And we've got Salome, who is a biblical figure of a destructive female power and delusion. Norma's fantasy of herself as Salome reflects her obsession with youth, beauty, and desire. And she says, who else would play Salome than her? Which again, we can say is a little bit sad, but again reflects her delusion, the fact she thinks she can play, I guess, a young adult. There's also this idea about, she kisses John the Baptist's head, that's been cut off on a tray, and we can sort of see that metaphorically happening with Joe as well. So yeah, a few nods to other texts in this film. Costuming, pretty straightforward. What the characters are wearing. We've got two clips or two frames here of Joe, one in his casual attire before he meets Norma, and then afterwards as well. Norma purchases him, I think, camel hair coat and a vicuna suit as well. Joe's costumes reflect his journey from a struggling screenwriter to a man entangled in Norma's world of illusion. Initially, Joe's wardrobe reflects his simplicity. It symbolises his unconcerned feelings towards his own appearance, as he is a struggling writer. However, Norma lavishes him with expensive attire, crafting his appearance to suit her desires. He really is a kept man. We see the bottom right, that tuxedo he wears on New Year's Eve. Even Artie says to him, who'd you borrow that from? To show how extravagant it really is, and how different it is to what Joe would normally wear, or what Joe could possibly afford, any writers could afford to wear. And the other quote I think of here is when he's trying on the suits, as long as the lady's paying. And we get that close-up of Joe's face, looking really unsure about the situation, or realising what's happening. He's become a kept man. So costuming, nice and straightforward one. Editing is the sequencing of shots and scenes, including any cuts that are made. We, of course, remember the Kuleshov effect from Rear Window. And the example I've got here is a two-shot. So we're cutting back and forth, cross-cutting between two scenes here. On New Year's Eve when Joe calls Max at the mansion. Joe is at Artie's party while Max is in the mansion. The two scenes are switched back and forth rapidly, which causes a tension between the characters. Joe now stands between two options, either staying at the party or returning with Norma. Essentially, his decision is, does he remain happy with his fellow writers but struggling, or does he return to the mansion for financial security? This juxtaposition also highlights the happiness of the down and out writers, because their party is full of laughter and it's really upbeat compared to the somber atmosphere of the mansion, particularly when he arrives home. But editing is pretty much any sort of sequencing of shots, any cross-cutting, any cuts that are sort of made, or I guess the order in which scenes take place. Symbols. We know symbols really well from pretty much every single text we have studied. There's quite a few symbols throughout this text. The one I'm using here is of the spotlight, and this shines on Norma when she returns to Paramount Studios. The spotlight is a symbol of fame, which has long deserted Norma, and returning to Paramount, the light once again shines on her, but only for a glimpse, feeding her illusion that she's still relevant. Once the light moves back to its place, in fact, I think DeMille says, put that light back where it belongs, sort of shows that Norma is out of place. The crowd leaves her alone. The only people you would probably see that recognise Norma anyway are older people, or older actors and older extras and stagehands as well. Now with symbols, I like to attach them to quotations for stronger analysis. And that's great because we've got 4 symbols on the next slide that have quotations attached to them. Top left, we have the microphone that Norma bats away when she's sitting in DeMille's seat at Paramount Studios. And the quote attached to that is, "They opened their mouths and out came talk, talk, talk." That microphone is menacing. It's almost taunting Norma when she returns to Paramount. These are in order. So bottom right now is a cigarette holder. And here we have Joe, I guess. He recognises that he's a bit like the cigarette. He's caught in her web. He's caught in her trap. He can't escape Norma. The next one is the car, the top right, which for Joe, he says losing his car would be like losing my legs. That's when he's obviously trying to get money to pay back the debt collectors. But it kind of, the car is in a sense symbolic of freedom, which he loses when his car gets taken away and he's trapped in Norma's house. And the last one is the monkey. And I'll link this one to a bit of narrative voice from Joe when after his first night at the mansion, he talks about having a mixed up dream about an organ grinder. An organ grinder, I think I mentioned this before, is the street artist, the musician who has a monkey attached to him that dances to his music. And the music was still there, Joe recounts, but where was I? And we can see this idea that the monkey, or Joe, in a sense, replaces the monkey, and we can even see it in what he wears as well. Other meta-language you could look at, anything to do with the genre and the film noir and any tropes. Two shots I've sort of spoken about there, mid shots, zooming or panning, montages is a particularly prominent one when Norma's getting ready to play her role as Salome. You've got establishing shots, soft focus, particularly on Norma, over-the-shoulder shots, silence, set design, props, and slow motion as well. These are all other, I guess, film techniques or meta language that you could use in your analysis. But the features don't stop there. There are, I guess, other textual features or structural features or stylistic features that you can definitely analyze in terms of the construction of the text. We've got the femme fatale, which is Norma. She's controlling and dominating, but there's this subversion of the traditional femme fatale who's meant to be this dangerous woman, because Norma is also a victim. She's a victim of Hollywood. And I've just written there that her psychological instability and dependence subvert the traditional femme fatale trope, which is quite common in film noir. Non-linear structure. So the film obviously opens with Joe's death, then recounts how he ended up there. You could say that it's a circular structure as well. And that's really important because, again, it reinforces, I guess, one, the inevitability of Joe's downfall, but it also means we're not as focused on the murder, but more so on how the murder happened and focusing more about Hollywood. We've got Joe, who I guess is the anti-hero. He's cynical, opportunistic, and allows himself to be kept by Norma for material comfort, but he sort of comes to his senses at the end of the day, but unfortunately for Joe, it is too late. He also tries to protect Betty as well, which I think is really important. We've got some irony. So, you know, Norma believing she's returning to stardom, but really she's being arrested for murder. And again, Wilder uses irony to comment on the destructive illusions that Hollywood creates. And that whole last scene with all the cameras being there and Max almost acting as a director, there's lots of irony there in terms of how Norma can become famous again, or could say become infamous. And we've got the juxtaposition, and we see this throughout the film, but I really like this idea about Norma versus Betty. You know, Betty's that young, innocent girl, that ingenue. Wilder contrasts Betty and Norma to explore generational shifts in industry and different responses to fame and success. And again, their influence on Joe is really important. And I guess they bring out two different sides to Joe. One is quite toxic. The other one is very, very different. Betty brings out the best in Joe. Let's have a look at this example scene. I've got 4 shots, 4 frames from this particular scene. It happens not long after the New Year's Eve party when I think we've got the Norma Desmond Follies here. She performs for Joe. She does this a bit, actually. I think the quote is, whenever she thought I was getting bored, she'd put on these shows. So have a think about what you could analyze from these 4 frames, thinking about some of the film techniques we've already looked at. So these are some things that I picked up on. The close-up of a twirling umbrella is quite hypnotic and entrancing. Could almost say that's how Jo has become trapped here. In the second shot, I've talked about the high camera angle shot of Norma performing over Jo, and the fact that her costuming doesn't quite match the Max Sennett bathing beauties. She's definitely very much covered up. Again, we can comment on things like age, but also delusion as well. In the background of that shot, you'll notice that Jo is surrounded by old photos of Norma, trapping him in her delusional world. He cannot escape Norma. We've got the mid shot. The third one captures Jo's disconsolate expression as he contemptuously lies to Norma that he's having a great time, juxtaposed by Norma's unbridled enthusiasm. And the camera zooms in to a tight close-up of Jo's anguished face as his voiceover questions audiences who don't know that someone sits down and writes a picture while actors are being lauded. You'll notice as well her hands rub against his face and his hair. Again, her hands are quite controlling. Her hands come up a bit throughout the film. They're sort of spider-like the way they wrap themselves around, particularly Jo. And also the fact he's lying on the couch. It's almost like he's at a doctor's appointment there, a psychologist's appointment there as well. But look, there's lots of things that you can pick up through each frame. So I definitely encourage you to look closely at the film and look for some unique examples. In terms of our analysis, I mentioned before, these are some sentence starters that I definitely encourage students to use initially when it comes to writing about film techniques. We've done similar stuff with our previous films and our previous novels and plays as well. So these should be pretty familiar to you. And there's a bit of a example paragraph down there, which features a lot of film techniques. I don't have to mention that many. But it's definitely important that you always analyze why they are used and how they link to the key themes, the key ideas, and also directorial intent. Again, we've seen these in the classroom. These are just a couple of posters. In terms of film technique verbs, I love using some of these verbs whenever I'm using film techniques in my analysis. So symbolizes, reinforces is a big one for me. Reflects, mirrors, or emphasizes are great, as well as underscores, accentuates, highlights, strengthens, and intensifies as well. Now the poster on the right-hand side is just ways that you can word up, ways that you can build your expression so that you're being, I guess, a little bit stronger, a little bit more detailed with your analysis. So rather than saying, Wilder uses a close-up, you might say, Wilder uses a revealing close-up or a tight close-up. Or if you're talking about lighting, you might call it low-key lighting or backlit lighting. Or if it was a soundtrack, you might talk about the haunting score, or the ominous score, or foreboding score. These are just words that you can use again to, one, improve your written expression, but also, I guess, further your analysis as well. And I definitely encourage you to start wording up here or there again. These can't all just be simply replace one word for the other, but they're definitely there for you to experiment with and play around with, particularly in the opening few weeks of this unit when we're writing our first and second text essays. All right, over to you. These are some things that I would think about when it comes to film techniques and wanting to improve my analysis by using them. The first thing I'd say is evidence banks are much better than quotation banks. What I mean by that is don't just have quote sheets and quotes as part of your evidence. It should also be things like film techniques and structural devices. So add these to your notes, they'll add complexity to your analysis. Mentioned it in the previous slide, but definitely think about wording up to elevate your written expression. And the last point is start looking at some how essay prompts and topics. So have a go at writing on how topics as a way to force you to include film techniques in your analysis. And in 2023, the VCAR example was, how does Wilder use or convey that Hollywood is both hollow and alluring? And the one from 2024, which is last year, if you're watching this as soon as this has come out, in Sunset Boulevard, how does Wilder portray Hollywood's infatuation with youth? So two topics there that you could definitely look at. And again, two which definitely prompt you to bring in lots of film techniques and structural features as well. But that's a quick look, a snapshot at film techniques. We'll be back again with more episodes in the meantime. Make sure you subscribe to 6P's podcast, and we'll see you next time.